flashes of memory present. Welcome to channel.
Scary story. I'll never forget the sound of that lock turning by itself. This is a brief account of an experience I had almost a year ago in the warehouse where I work alone. No one I've told has believed me, but perhaps you all will. I work in a warehouse that my father purchased. He bought it for 25% of its cost from a farmer who seemed very excited to be rid of it. It is in the middle of Mennonite country, with no neighbors for a half-mile around. Look out the window. You see cornfields and scraggly trees. Cell service? Forget about it. I work here alone, painting and preparing the front office portion for eventual functionality. To get to the front office, you must go through a hallway from the main warehouse, into a secondary office, and then through another door into the front. I frequently hear bumps and thuds and occasionally will go into the warehouse and feel air movement. But I've always attributed it to drafts and animal life in the roof. The only thing that has ever made me uneasy about the building is the fact that all of the door locks are reversed. Whoever installed those locks didn't intend to keep people out, they intended to keep something in. I was in the front office when I began to hear the thudding. I ignored it and continued to apply masking tape to the door I was working on. But this time, it was accompanied by a screeching sound. Not loud, but audible. I was freaked out, but convinced myself that it was just a pissed-off raccoon or squirrel that had found its way inside. I continued working, until I heard the slam. The door to the secondary office had been open, it sounded like it had violently slammed shut. I peeked around the corner and saw that I was right. The secondary door was now closed. I tried to logic it through in my head that a strong draft had sucked it closed. Although I knew there was no such draft. The thudding began again. Closed this time. I've never been able to put a proximity on it, but now it sounded like it was right on the other side of the door. I froze, unsure of what was happening. My eyes locked on the door handle, which began to turn. The door disengaged its latch and slowly swung open. Wider, nothing there. Nothing visible, no air movement, just quiet. So quiet. A quiet that seemed to overwhelm me with its presence, a quiet so thick I couldn't breathe. The quiet was shattered when the screech came again. This time, it was clearly human. Pained, angered, and emanating from the main warehouse. The door slammed. That entirely broke my frozen, fearful state. I ran. I got into my car and drove until I was in cell range to call my father. He didn't believe anything about the doors closing, but agreed that the building had something weird about it. He told me he'd be right out. Fast forward half an hour. My dad and I met up and drove back to the warehouse. I showed him the door that slammed, showing him that it was separated from both the front office and the main warehouse, so no draft could have closed it. I told him about the thuds, the screeching, and the sudden quiet that overcame the building. He decided that we should check the main warehouse. Emboldened by his presence, I led the way. Something you should know about this warehouse. It was formerly a furniture manufacturing place owned by a Mennonite farmer. They made handmade chairs, tables, etc. Because of all the cutting that went on, the floor is thickly coated with dust. We walked into the warehouse and saw nothing out of the ordinary. The dust was untouched, the doors were closed, windows were locked. The only thing out of the ordinary was one of the hanging fluorescent light fixtures. It was hanging askew, and swaying slightly. Insisting we take a look at the mount to ensure it didn't just break loose, my dad grabbed a step ladder. He supported it while I climbed up and grabbed the swinging light. I looked on top of the light and saw a handprint. A single, fresh, inhumanly large handprint. No footprints in the dust around the light, no signs of a presence. I climbed down and switched places with my father. He saw it and said, "What the hell? There's been no one in here for years." He climbed down and told me he'd been suspicious of someone breaking in and stealing parts from the warehouse light system. He couldn't believe me that this wasn't human. That something wasn't right here. The last thing he said was, "Nothing is here. Next time, just go back to work." And then, as if to show its presence, the thud returned. This time it wasn't just a thud, but more of an earthquake. The entire building felt like it moved. The heartbeat-like thud was then overlaid by the screech. The awful, awful screech. It felt like was coming from the walls themselves. We ran. We ran and I haven't returned. My father hired someone to finish my job and has since moved into the office. He's heard the thudding, but thus far nothing has happened further. What actually happened? I don't know. Nor do I ever care to know. What I do know is that there is something paranormal in that building, and the man who sold it to us knew. I'll never forget the sound of that lock turning by itself or the feeling of the deafening silence. Strange sounds among the stacks. My school's library is open until around 2 in the morning. For the idiots like me who don't do their essays until the last minute. It's a pretty small building and most of the books are in the basement area called the stacks. Just to give you a quick layout, there's the big main stairs that go down to the stacks, a vending machine room, and the long hallway with 4 entrances into the stacks. The stacks are 2 really big rooms on opposite sides of the hallway with a huge amount of bookshelves and study desks lining the walls. I was there around 11 p.m. last year. It was a pretty research-intensive essay, so I was down in the stacks working in one of the study desks. So I didn't have to keep going upstairs and downstairs again. I had been there for maybe 2 hours and everyone except for a boy working a few desks down from me had left already. I was pretty zoned out by this point. It was an 8 a.m. class, so I didn't have much time until it was due and I was sort of panicking. So it really pissed me off when I heard someone flipping through book pages really fast to make them do that loud noise at the other end of the room. I sort of ignored it for a while thinking they'd go away eventually, but they just kept doing it. After about 5 minutes, I got sick of it and started to walk over to tell them to knock it off. I get about 3 steps across the room and it just stopped. I sat back down and it was quiet again for like 10 more minutes. Before the flipping pages noise started again. Only loads louder, like they'd grabbed a huge book that time. The boy started to get pissed off too and he stood up and started walking through the bookshelves trying to find them. It keeps going, so I got up too and started looking around with him. It got really loud and it was pretty obvious where it was coming from by that point. So we started walking towards it. He was on one side of the shelves and I was on the other. We walked all the way down the shelves. No one there. We hadn't seen anyone come in the stacks and we were on the side of the room with the entrances. No way could anyone have come in without us seeing them. The noise stopped again. And we both just sort of slowly walked back to our seats. I assumed it was just a fan or something in the other room and I really needed to get my essay done. We sat down and immediately the noise started again. It sounded like it was coming from right next to the guy's chair. He shoved his stuff in his bag, looked at me, said, "Fuck this," and took off. I was out of there maybe 5 seconds behind him. I still won't go back in the stacks at night, even when there's other people down there. No essay's worth getting murdered by a weird book ghost. Shaped like a person, but not a person. This occurrence didn't happen to me, but to my grandmother. It would have taken place in the 1930s. My grandmother was a young teen at the time and she lived with her mother and 5 siblings in an old house in the middle of the woods. The area was the Ozark Mountains in southern Missouri. My grandmother had got into a fight with her mother. She took off into the woods all day to get away from her for a while. When it got dark, she decided to come home. When she got home, the doors were locked and everyone was in bed. There was an old cot sitting outside the house and she decided to just sleep on the cot until morning. In the morning when she woke up, there was some creature sitting at the end of the cot. It has been 15 years since I have heard this story, and she only told me once, so my memory is a little fuzzy. I remember she said it was really ugly and had a full set of sharp teeth. It was shaped like a person but didn't look like a person. She said that it just sat there and smiled at her with its abnormally large mouth of sharp teeth. When she started to get up from the cot to get away, it would start to get up and move towards her. When she would sit back down, it would sit back down. She sat there staring at it for a few seconds and it continued to sit and smile at her. The creature was sitting between her and the front door. She finally jumped up and made a run for the back door. When she got to the back door, it was locked, but her mother was in the kitchen making biscuits. She was banging on the door screaming to be let in, and her mother told her to go around to the front because her hands were covered in dough. My grandmother screamed she couldn't and was frantic enough that her mother ran to let her in. She told her mother what she had seen. She had my grandmother's 2 brothers take the cot out to the woods and chop it up and burn it.
Thanks for listening to this story to the end. Every Wednesday and Sunday Flashes of Memory publishes a new story.